Okay guys, so with episode 7 out now, there's been a lot of discussion about what everything means, but I want to focus on something specific that I think is one of the most important reveals in the entire episode, and it's about Kinger and what Caine has actually been doing to him this whole time. Because if you start connecting what we saw in episode 7 with everything we already know about Kinger from the earlier episodes, there's this pattern emerging that suggests Caine has been running a very deliberate long-term operation on Kinger specifically, and it's not just the usual manipulation he does with everyone else. This is something way more targeted and calculated, and once you see it, it completely changes how you understand Kinger's role in the circus. So let's start with the most obvious thing from episode 7, which is Abel and that whole fake rescue plan. And yeah, we know now that Abel was just an NPC that Caine created to mess with everyone. The whole thing was a lie. There was never any real escape plan, but here's what's interesting. Even though Abel was fake, some of the information he gave them might not have been. Because if you go back and look at that scene where Abel is explaining his plan, there's this moment where he has a paper with a list of CNA workers, and you can clearly see Kinger's name on that list, and Kaufmo's name is also on that list, but it's scratched out, presumably because he abstracted. And at first you might think, okay, this is all part of Caine's fabricated story, none of this is real, but what if that specific detail, that list of names, what if that's actually true? Because we've known for a while now that Kinger probably worked on the digital circus before he got trapped in it. He literally said in episode 3 that he spent 7 years studying computer science, and look where it got him. And in episode 6 we saw him create that butterfly out of nowhere to heal Ragata, and when she asked him about it, he said he just made it up, which doesn't sound like something a regular circus member should be able to do. That sounds like someone who has developer privileges or at least some kind of admin access to the system. So maybe Caine included Kinger's name on that list because it's actually true. Kinger really did work for CNA. He really was one of the developers who helped create this place, and maybe Kaufmo was too before he abstracted, and that's why his name is crossed out. And if that's the case, then Caine using a fake NPC to reveal this information makes perfect sense, because he's trying to discredit the truth by wrapping it in a lie, so that even if Kinger or the others start to suspect that he really was a developer, they'll dismiss it as part of Abel's fake story. But if Kinger really is one of the people who helped build the digital circus, then he's also one of the only people who might know how to shut it down, or disable it, or find an actual exit, and Caine would absolutely know this, which means Caine has been actively working to make sure Kinger never remembers enough to actually do anything about it. And that brings us to Kinger's whole memory thing, because we've seen throughout the series that Kinger can't remember anything when he's in the light, but the second he's in darkness, he becomes lucid and coherent and wise, and we saw this most clearly in episode 3 during the Haunted Mansion adventure, where he was helping Pomni and giving her actual good advice, and talking about Queenie in ways that showed he was fully present and aware. But it's getting clear now that this could be a status condition that Caine put on him, because at the end of episode 7, Jax directly accuses Caine of messing with their minds, and Caine admits that he can temporarily alter their minds as status conditions. And technically, Kinger's memory loss in the light fits that description perfectly. It's a temporary effect that only happens under specific conditions, except in Kinger's case, those conditions are almost always active, because the circus is bright basically all the time. And maybe that's not an accident. Maybe Caine specifically designed the circus to be as bright as possible to keep this status condition active on Kinger constantly, to make sure he never stays in the dark long enough to piece together what's really going on, or remember how the system works, or figure out how to escape. And this actually explains so much about how Caine treats Kinger throughout the series, because if you pay attention, Caine is weirdly nice to Kinger compared to how he treats everyone else. He gave him his own mini-adventure in episode 4 where Kinger got to ride a bull. He doesn't seem to get frustrated with him the way he does with Zubul or Pomni, and maybe that's because Caine knows that as long as Kinger stays confused and scattered, he's not a threat, so there's no reason to be harsh with him. But the second Kinger shows signs of remembering something important, Caine shuts it down immediately, and we saw this happen in episode 7 in the final scene, when all the circus members are confronting Caine about the fake exit and everything that just happened. The big reveal moment is this massive bright white light, but despite all that brightness, Kinger manages to remember, and the way Caine reacts to that is absolutely telling, because he completely freaks out. He looks genuinely shocked and maybe even scared.
Scratch. The first abstraction.
Hey! I didn't say anything like that!
But who or what is Scratch? Well, there's this screenshot that one of the animators shared from their work on the show, and it shows Dobby the dog with a file name that says Scratch Abstracted, which suggests that Scratch might be Dobby, and Dobby appears to be the first character who ever abstracted in the digital circus, like before Queenie, before Kaufmo, before anyone else we've heard about. And if Kinger remembers Scratch, if he remembers the very first abstraction that happened in the circus, then that means his memories go way back, possibly all the way back to when the circus was first created or first started trapping people. And that's information that could be incredibly dangerous for Caine if Kinger ever fully remembers it and shares it with the others. Because maybe Scratch's abstraction happened because Caine went too far with his mind manipulation. Like maybe Scratch was one of the early test cases where Caine was experimenting with how much he could mess with someone's head before they completely broke. And if Kinger remembers the specifics of what happened to Scratch, that would reveal that Caine is directly responsible for causing abstractions, not just failing to prevent them. And Caine has been trying to keep Kinger from remembering that specific event for who knows how long. Because if the circus members found out that abstraction isn't this random thing that just happens when people lose hope, but is actually the result of Caine pushing people too far with psychological torture, that would completely destroy any trust they have left in him. And the fact that Kinger managed to say Scratch out loud in front of everyone, despite the blinding light, that's probably Caine's worst nightmare. But there's another layer to this that's even more disturbing, because if Caine has been manipulating Kinger's memory this whole time throughout that status condition, what else has he been doing to him? Because we know that Queenie, Kinger's wife, abstracted at some point before the show started, and Kinger clearly loved her deeply, and her loss has been one of the defining traumas of his existence in the circus. But what if Queenie's abstraction wasn't random? What if Caine deliberately pushed her too far with his mind games as a way to break Kinger's mental state even further? Because if you wanted to make sure a developer who knows how the system works never becomes lucid enough or stable enough to actually do anything about their situation, one of the most effective ways would be to traumatize them so severely that they can't think straight even when they are given the opportunity. And losing Queenie would absolutely do that to Kinger. It would shatter him in ways that would make it almost impossible for him to focus on anything else, and combined with the memory manipulation that keeps him confused in the light, it creates this perfect prison where Kinger has all this knowledge and all these memories locked away in his head, but he can never access them long enough or clearly enough to actually use them. But there's one more detail from earlier in the series that I think connects to all of this, because back in episode 5 during the presidential adventure, there was the scene where Pomni had to cut a wire on a bomb, and she had to choose between blue and red, and Kinger told her that he'd personally go with blue because it's his favorite color, and he specifically said,
I'd personally go with blue. Blue's my favorite color, it being closest to black and all.
And at that time, that just seemed like a weird Kinger comment. But now knowing what we know about the blue and red buttons in episode 7, it's actually kind of interesting, because the blue button was the one that would have let them exit, and Kinger said he'd choose blue, which suggests that on some subconscious level, maybe he knew. Maybe some part of him that still remembers being a developer understood that blue meant exit or escape or something important. But he couldn't articulate why. He couldn't explain his reasoning beyond saying it's his favorite color because it's close to black, which again connects to this whole thing about being more lucid in darkness. Like even when he can't remember the specifics, there are these little hints that deeper knowledge is still there, it's just locked away where he can't access it. And there's also that moment in episode 7 where Kinger looked like he was trying to tell Pomni something, and maybe that was him trying to warn her about Abel or trying to tell her something about the exit, but the brightness of the tent and the status condition kicked in, and he lost the thought before he could finish it. And that's the real tragedy of Kinger's situation, because he probably has all the answers, he probably knows exactly how to get everyone out of the circus. He might even know what CNA really is and why they are all trapped there. But Caine has made it so he can never access that information long enough to do anything useful with it. And every time he gets close, something happens to reset him back to his confused state. So the big question is, can Kinger ever actually break free from this status condition and remember everything, or is Caine's control too strong? Because based on what we saw in episode 7, Kinger is starting to push through it. He managed to remember Scratch despite the blinding light, which suggests that maybe the status condition isn't as absolute as Caine thinks it is. Maybe there are cracks forming, and if Kinger keeps having these moments of breakthrough, eventually he might remember enough to actually be dangerous. And maybe that's what the final episodes are building toward. Kinger finally having a full moment of clarity where everything comes back to him at once, and he tells the others the truth about CNA and the circus and how to escape, and maybe he also reveals that Caine has been deliberately causing abstractions by pushing people too far with his mind manipulation. But for now, what we know is that Caine has been actively manipulating Kinger's memory to keep him from remembering that he's a developer who helped create the circus, and he's been using brightness as a weapon to maintain a status condition that keeps Kinger confused and scattered. And he's been deliberately pushing other developers like Kaufmo and possibly Caine and Scratch to abstraction when they got too close to figuring things out, and all of this suggests that Kinger is actually the most important character in the entire show, because he's the one person who has the knowledge to end this, if only he could remember it. But let me know what you think about this theory down in the comments. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.